On Christmas Eve 1926, the emergency room at New York's Bellevue Hospital was overwhelmed. Patients flooded through the doors, gasping for air. Some were actively hallucinating. One man claimed Santa Claus was chasing him with a baseball bat. Others were rapidly losing their eyesight. By the end of the holiday, dozens were dead. Doctors realized they weren't seeing the typical results of overintoxication. This was a sudden, lethal spike in fatalities that suggested a new, highly potent contaminant had entered the city's supply of bootleg liquor. To understand how this happened, we have to look at the state of Prohibition. Federal agents had successfully choked off traditional smuggling routes from Canada and overseas. Facing a massive shortage, organized crime syndicates needed a new domestic supply. They found it in industrial alcohol. Bootleggers began stealing grain alcohol originally manufactured for paints, solvents, and fuels. They diverted an estimated 60 million gallons a year into the thirsty American black market. This massive shift overwhelmed traditional law enforcement. Outmatched on the streets, the U.S. government abandoned standard policing and adopted a radical chemical strategy to stop the flow of liquor at the source. Since 1906, the government required manufacturers to denature industrial alcohol. By adding foul-tasting or toxic chemicals to the mix, the product became undrinkable and therefore exempt from the high taxes levied on drinkable spirits. Crime syndicates responded by hiring top-tier rogue chemists. These bootleg scientists used advanced washing and distillation techniques to renature the stolen alcohol, stripping out the chemical additives and selling the clear liquid to speakeasies. The Treasury Department retaliated. They forced industrial manufacturers to spike their batches with a barrage of increasingly complex poisons, substances like formaldehyde, chloroform, and iodine. But the black market chemists kept outsmarting the regulators. They consistently identified the new additives, filtered them out, and maintained a steady supply of seemingly drinkable booze. Frustrated by this ongoing chemical stalemate, the Treasury Department decided to abandon mere deterrence. They opted for a much more lethal additive that their opponents couldn't easily handle. In 1926, the government mandated a new industrial formula. This one required up to 10% methyl alcohol, commonly known as wood alcohol. This shows the difference between ethanol, safe grain alcohol, and methanol. Both molecules enter the human liver. Enzymes easily break down ethanol, but completely fail to process methanol. The trapped poison stalls, lingering and stewing, slowly metabolizing into two highly toxic byproducts, formaldehyde and formic acid. The physical symptoms are gruesome. The formic acid directly attacks the optic nerve, causing permanent blindness. Soon after, it triggers a rapid shutdown of the central nervous system. Since methyl alcohol is nearly impossible for even expert chemists to reliably filter out, the government effectively turned the nation's illicit supply into a deadly gamble for every drinker. The impact of this strategy split sharply along class lines. Wealthy Americans could afford safe smuggled foreign liquor. The poisoned industrial booze almost exclusively ravaged the poor, who were forced to buy whatever was pouring in lower-class speakeasies. New York medical examiner Charles Norris tracked every one of these deaths. He publicly accused the federal government of mass murder, arguing they were morally responsible for weaponizing the nation's industrial supply. Strict prohibitionists dismissed his concerns. They argued the government owed no safety guarantees to lawbreakers, famously declaring that anyone who drank industrial alcohol was committing deliberate suicide. By the time Prohibition was finally repealed in 1933, an estimated 10,000 Americans had been killed directly by the government's poisoning program. The program ended with the repeal of the 18th Amendment, but it left behind 10,000 victims, a stark record of how far the government was willing to go to enforce a failing law.